Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. We are so happy to have you here with us today. My name is Priscila Giamassi, and I will be your host for today's session. This is the last session of an incredible four-part series learning session titled, What LGBTQIA2S BIPOC Want Prevention Professionals to Know. This series is a collaboration between Central East ATTC, Central East PTTC, the National American Indian and Alaska Native PTTC, and the National Hispanic and Latino PTTC. During this last session, we will discuss how can we transform this information into actionable and practical steps to enhance service delivered to the LGBTQ BIPOC community and make the difference. Thank you. Next. So here's a disclaimer with some information about our TTCs. Next. Please allow us to share some brief instructions for today's session. A copy of this presentation will be made available after the event. The lines will be muted throughout the presentation so as to minimize background noise. When we get to the Q&A portion of our session, you will have the opportunity to ask questions by clicking the Q&A box, and the moderator will present your questions to the panelists. We will also be asking you to fill out a brief survey at the end of this event. The satisfaction evaluation is very important for the work that we do and provide us opportunity to improve our training efforts. Although we are not securing continuing education credits for this event, we plan to do so. A certificate of completion will be sent out after this event. Let's begin. Thank you. Next. Here's a map of the ATTC network. The ATTC network is a multidisciplinary resource for professionals in the addiction, treatment, and recovery services field. And it was established in 1993 by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. Next. And here's the map for the PTTC network. PTTC is also a multidisciplinary resource for professionals in the prevention field, and it was established in 2018 by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. The ATTC and the PTTC network serves the 50 states of the US, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, the Pacific Islands of Guam, American Samoa, Palau, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and Mariana Islands. You will receive a copy of these slides, and you will be able to click in each logo to learn more about our centers and access the resources and materials available. We will also provide the links here on the chat. Now it's time to introduce you to our moderator. Cindy Segot is the program coordinator for the National American Indian and Alaska Native Prevention Technology Transfer Center. She's a member of the Akan tribe from Ghana, in West Africa. Cindy, it's a pleasure to collaborate with you on this series. Thank you for your partnership. Please feel free to introduce our amazing panelists.
Thank you, Priscilla, and thank you everyone for joining us. As Priscilla said, my name is Cindy Segot. I am the program coordinator for the National American Indian Alaska Native PTTC and also a member of the Akan tribe from West Africa. I would like to introduce our panelists briefly, and then I'll let them do a proper introduction of themselves. So I'll start with Anna Mabel Jones. Anna is an Oxford House Resource Coordinator in DC and Maryland, a nonprofit network of 3,104 international self-help recovery houses. Next, please. Next, we have Dimitri Garner. Dimitri is a peer recovery specialist at the emergency department, and this has given him the vantage point to encounter minority disparities. Next, please. Next, we have Leo Martinez. Leo is a project manager at the Esperanza United. Next, please. And we have Gary Newman. Gary is an enrolled member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes of the Flatland Indian Nation. He's a certified prevention specialist and has over 33 years of experience in the field of prevention and human resource development. Next, please. So thank you again and welcome to this, the last session of our 4-part virtual series. From now, we'll stop the PowerPoint presentation so that the conversation will be more uplifting. So I will be passing on to our panelists for today. And the first question is, could you please tell us a bit about yourself? Tell us how you identify, where you're from, what you do, and what your role is. And I'll start with Mrs. Anna Mabel Jones.
Thank you so much, Cindy. So hello, everyone. My name is Anna Mabel Jones, and I'm a woman in long-term recovery. And what that means for me is I haven't used a drink or a drug since August the 30th, 1999. And because of that, I'm honored to stand here before you as an Oxford House resource coordinator. Oxford houses are recovery houses for people who are recovering from substance use disorder. So I lived in an Oxford house for 2 years. So I truly feel like it saved my life, being around peers who were going through the same thing that I was experiencing. Who better to know your behavior than someone who's been there? I identify as a African-American woman. My pronouns are she and her. And it is just, and I'm from, I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., but I now live in Laurel, Maryland with my husband of 15 years. What do you do? I spoke a little bit about being a resource coordinator. I have the privilege of being a resource coordinator where I'm able to go and work with people in recovery, meeting them exactly where they are and working with them one-on-one for their wellness so that they can grow in their recovery, and working on the holistic approach, seeing that person as a whole and treating them as a resource. What is my role? I wear a lot of hats. Some things are coming up now that I've learned in being in recovery and being a woman of color is to give back to the community. So what's happening for me now is a lot of organizing and growing and connecting to the community to let them know of things that are happening in the world. And that's what I'd like to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. So I'll pass on to Gary Newman to introduce himself. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Welcome, everyone. As Cindy said, I'm a member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribe from the Flathead Indian Reservation in Montana. And that was where I was born and raised until our family was relocated off the reservation to an urban center, and my life took a great turn. And I've worked in this field since 1987 when I got sober. And I celebrated 37 years of sobriety this year, and I'm very proud of that. And I have 2 children, 7 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. And I'm two-spirited, and I identify as he, him. And I've worked, as I said, in this field for a number of years, but I've worked more at the grassroots level, where I've been on the ground in the community, community meetings, and looking at ways to translate the wishes of a community to tribal leadership or the federal government. And 6 years ago, I moved to Anchorage, Alaska, where I'm working with 32 Alaska Native villages and communities on a suicide prevention project. And the work is so rewarding by being out in the villages that are very remote and oftentimes deal with challenges that communities in the lower 48 don't deal with. Like one of the villages is sinking. And by 2025, the whole village will be underwater because of climate change. So they have different challenges, and food in a lot of the villages are so expensive at the stores. Oranges, for example, can be $8. So the community spend more time on subsistence and gathering and hunting and fishing and gathering food to get them through the winter. And it's an honor to be part of this project. And I hope I answered all the questions.
Thank you, Gary. So we'll pass on to Dimitri.
All right, well, thank you for having me, and what an honor and a privilege to be here for the fourth part of this VLS. I identify as he and him, and I'm actually from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and I relocated to Baltimore City about a little over 3 years ago. In that process, I did a geographical change in order to seek recovery. It's kind of weird how people will say to me, why did you move to the city from a rural area to find recovery? Is because I had to change my people, places, and things around me. And I use that same mentality and approach to my life. If it's not working for you, then you must do something different. With that being said, things that I do different today is I'm a full-time student at University of Maryland in Baltimore County. I'm studying public policy, and hopefully this coming spring, I'll be joining their accelerated MPP program. With that said, with a 3.5 GPA, and I work full-time for organization MedStar in one of their hospitals in Baltimore County called Franklin Square Hospital. Here I work as a CPRS, Certified Peer Recovery Specialist, and I'm also the co-chair for our health wellness committee here that serves our 4,000 associates here at the hospital. Right now, we are in the staging plans of constructing relaxation rooms throughout the hospital, and refiguring our main lobby, our employee entrance lobby, for an experience of to redesign into an employee experience of health wellness for all of our associates. So with a full schedule, I still find that recovery and running an NA meeting once a week is a part of my process of being of service. Being of service keeps me grounded and keeps the ability to keep going on. Finding life's recovery is in different modes today, but I do find them in everything that I do. Being of service first puts me first in order to be engaging in the process of being open today, open and willing to still be able to do what I was taught to do so many years ago. And that is, if you're open, you're able to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri. And then now, Leo, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. My name is Leo Martinez, and I like this question about how do you identify yourself. I am, because I talk about identity and culture on a daily basis, but I identify as a gay Latinx man who is also an immigrant. I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and I grew up as a youth witness of domestic violence. I am hard of hearing, and I wear hearing aids. So, and thank you for the captions. That's wonderful to have for those of us who are hard hearing. I live with a mental health disability, and I have done so for many years, and you know, and making the most to thrive with within those confines. I live in Jacksonville. I lived before, I moved here 2 years ago, but before I lived in Atlanta for 23 years. And before that, I was born and raised and lived for 25 years in
We can't hear you.
I think we lost Leo sound. Oh. So maybe Leo could unmute himself and try again.
How about now? Can you hear me? All
yes,
right.
Thank you.
I was mentioning Esperanza United is the organization that I work for. Up until 2 days ago, we were known as a Casa de Esperanza National Latino Network, and we are the National Resource Center on domestic violence in the Latino community. And under Esperanza United, I do a lot of projects under different funders: the Family Violence Prevention Services Act, the Office for Victims of Crime, and the Office on Violence Against Women. I'm also a community organizer, a national speaker, social entrepreneur. I started an organization a few years back called a Latino Link in Atlanta, Georgia, which they're still thriving, and they work still with the Latinx LGBTQ community. I'm currently starting because I just can't help myself another LGBTQ project here in Jacksonville, because there isn't any organizations that work with adult LGBTQ folks. I am a steering committee member of the Hearing Loss Association of America, the Jacksonville chapter, and that's about it. So I think I didn't go over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. And thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. And so we'll go on to the next question. We had the first 3 sessions in the previous weeks, and we talked about the risk and protective factors, the current behavioral health system, the issues being faced, and also talked about how to increase engagement and retention of LGBTQIA2S BIPOC. This question will be for Dimitri and Anna. Please, can you share 1 or 2 highlights with the participants for those who may not have attended or those who might have forgotten a little bit of what we talked about? What were the takeaways? Thank you.
All right. Thank you. For me personally, and hopefully Anna can agree with this, the takeaways were personal. I think that what resonated for each one of us that was here, it had to hit on a personal level. And 2 of those that I can personally say is cultural humility and the importance of the approach. In cultural humility, you have to take a real self-honest look at you and your own biases and your reflection of how you engage with another community. Cultural humility is an approach that is ongoing, meaning that it is not just looked at that one day, it's looked at every day. Working in the field of community engagement, you have to take an examination just the same way you would do in your own recovery. Take the examination of, am I of best service today? Is there any biases that I'm dealing with today, just on a personal day, that may hinder me from servicing my community? And the importance of the approach is also very critical. How I engage, how I address minorities, how I address my own, I'm going to say my own limited abilities of understanding another culture is important of how I'm successful in that engagement. That comes with, again, honesty. That comes with the approach of going to other peers that may have a better understanding of that community and saying, hey, can you help me? Can you help me engage? That's some takeaways that I've learned. The other part of the question is share some highlights for the participants. Dr. Matt Ignacio talked about one instance that he went to tribal council to talk about prevention of HIV. And for whatever reason, it didn't go too well with the council. And so he was not able to engage with the citizens of that tribe. So I took from that, how I address leadership matters. If I can't get past the leadership, I'm not able to get to the community that I need to serve. So I need to have the understanding of how to speak the language that is necessary to get me to the next step. That means, how do I engage with leadership is very important if I tend to engage with the community. So those barriers, understand the barriers that you're against, or understand the barriers that you are placed in front of, and then go from there. So thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri. Could Anna share some takeaways with us? Thank you.
Yeah, Dimitri was so on point. That was awesome. You captured a lot of it. Yeah, we've been able to be on these panels with some great speakers and just wonderful presenters who bring so much to the table. One of the main takeaways for me was nothing for us without us, right? So on that, meaning that we need to be at the table. So LGBTQ, BIPOC, if something is happening, we need to be there so that you can understand better and we can present in that way. You can't talk about our community and not have us there, You know, we stress how that's happening a lot, and we're not there. So how can you even really know if you know, we're not at the table? So nothing for us without us was major. Some of the highlights, we've talked about how things have changed over time, and now we're coming forth and we're speaking, you know, because we want to have a voice, we want to be heard, we want to be seen. You know, to me, you know, just this presentation here, you know, just specifically to our community and inclusivity, you know, with this and bringing it up and freely talking about it, you know, what do, you know, preventionists need to know, right? So that's putting it out there and really being open with it. Exploring the many dimensions of recovery was something that was brought up, meaning that everybody does not recover the same, you know, and you can't put us in the same box as you can put someone else. Me as an African-American woman, I have a lot of trauma, you know, especially as a woman in recovery. My recovery is going to look different than a lot of other cultures. You know, I've been through some things, you know, molestation, rape, all those things have to be brought to the table. And then the family background, right, is major. Dimitri talked about a culture. You know, we spoke a lot about that and how important it is to understand your biases. Thank you so much for referencing that, Dimitri. But the eagerness to want to learn. We're in a field where we're supposed to help people. You know, we're supposed to help community. So that's what you're in this field for, right? And just not treating everybody the same. And it's about building relationships too. We talked a lot about that, connecting in that way as far as building relationships. We talked about what's happening now in the present. You know, a lot of things are happening now. I can say, you know, for the Me Too movement that's happening now, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement that's happening now, you know, being at the table with that. And truly, we didn't get into, you know, white privilege or anything like that about knowing, you know, where that's from. We did get into some microaggressions, you know, that can happen with people not understanding what that is. But I would say, you know, the highlights are like, just keep it going, more trainings. Don't let it sit in the back. You know, secrets keep us sick, right? And a lot of times people are scared to approach it or ask you a question. It's okay to ask a question. I'm LGBTQ, I have to ask those questions so that I can know how to approach it right and, you know, and show up and want to be there for them. So I'm not afraid to ask questions today, right? So we talked about that. And then multiple pathways, right? Multiple pathways. I think Dimitri and I were major on that. Again, that multiple pathways are so real, that everybody is not the same. And don't be afraid to ask questions. So that was some of the major takeaways for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Dimitri. Those were great summaries and great takeaways to share. I'll go on to the next question, and this will be for all of our panelists. What do you think, or what do you know is currently hindering progress within the field? I'll start with Leo.
Thank you, Cindy. First, I'd like to acknowledge what this current pandemic crisis has done on professionals, on everyday folks, and it has created a lot of burnout, a lot of isolation. We're overworked, underpaid, of course, but that's not new. And that's because, you know, in our fields, where everybody else slowed down, we sped up, we accelerated. You know, I think when in March of 2020, when everybody saw like, oh, everything's closing down, actually our work double or triple. We were getting all kinds of requests, and it was like almost crazy, and hasn't really slowed down. So yeah. So I just wanted to address that first as something that is hindering us, but it's hopefully won't be forever, and we'll be able to go through this storm, you know, in the best way possible. Something else, I thank you, Dimitri, for mentioning cultural humility. As you know, something that you guys talked in the last 3 sessions And that's something that he's taken away. And I really think that understanding how to provide services in a culturally responsive way is the only way, is the way to be trauma informed. Because I hear people say, "Oh yes, we're trauma informed," and you know, we tend to get a lot of trendy words, but at the core of being trauma informed is also understanding people's culture. It's understanding where people are coming from, meeting them where they're at. So, you know, and with that is tied up to community engagement, which we get it often confused. And it is going out to community and understanding community and coming from community and bringing people over and asking them, what is it that we should do for this problem, for these issues? And then working with them and having them do the work along with us. We should be change facilitators. We're not change makers. The solutions needs to come from our communities. And I think that we tend to do it the other way. It's just like, oh, we are holders of the knowledge, so let me tell you how you're going to solve these problems. And the only way that people can solve any kind of social issue, and in this case for LGBTQIA2S plus communities, is something that is very important. And I learned this years ago when I worked with a professor from Georgia State, Dr. Julia Perilla, and she always talked about critical consciousness, or what we say in Spanish, concientización, which means just if we get to understand our own circumstances deeply, then we can make change. Then we can change those circumstances. But until we don't get that light bulb going off, nothing's going to change. So that's, I think, the way that we should approach things. It's just to get into people so they can make the change. I think also probably as professionals, we don't do enough of meaningful collaborations. And as having co-founded an organization and doing a lot of work with other professionals, I have seen myself not supported by other professionals, even from mainstream LGBTQ organizations. It's because like, oh, well, you know, we already have this determine how we're going to proceed, instead of just allowing everybody to be at the table of conversations, which is something that Anna also was mentioning. So we got to give people the opportunities. Is there somebody that is not at our tables of conversation? Okay, let's bring them on. Let's make space for those folks. And that's something that within the LGBTQ movement has been changing a little bit. We still see things like, for example, what happened with the Pride in Boston. That what is pretty much they just decided to shut down instead of actually welcoming those who are different within the LGBT community. So those are the kind of things that I think we need to pay attention to, because they are really hindering us. It's the only way to advance our movement.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you for sharing some of the things we need to pay attention to. I'll pass on to Dimitri.
Thank you. The question is asked, what is currently hindering our progress? And this may going to sound very obvious, but it's behavioral health. To put this in a bigger perspective than my job, I see countless individuals that miss the opportunity to deal with their root problems. Looking at it from treatment centers perspective, where I have volunteered in, looking at it from brief interventions that I do at a hospital, we don't engage the part of behavioral health early enough in the intervention. We'll go ahead and start talking about trauma and start talking about trauma healing and deal with medications that may be needed, or we'll deal with certain individual behaviors when in fact that the substance use disorder may be just maybe not the root cause at all. It may be a molestation. It may be other issues that happen during childhood. It may be a lack of resources. It may be SESs. Whatever the case may be that gets anybody into a state of mind of wanting to hurt themselves or others, or wanting to continue to not understand, or putting a needle in their arm and not wanting to. Some behavioral health initiatives need to be enacted on that individual, meaning that we cannot make all these programs up and exclude behavioral health. We cannot sit here and decide to say we can address substance use disorders in the community and not have behavioral health as teaming and partnering with us through the whole process. It makes no sense. For me personally, I had 26 years of active drug addiction. Within that 26 years, don't you think I did things I didn't want to do? And doing things I didn't want to do scarred me mentally and in my soul, where it reflected in my actions. But until I started to deal with those things, relapse occurred over and over again, because I never had anybody ask me deeply what my trauma was, what my issues was. Putting needles in my arms and drinking a fifth of liquor, that was just to cope with the pain that I had. How can we go do treatment? How can I promote treatment if I don't promote the behavioral health that goes with it? You may not tell me everything that's wrong with you during a brief intervention. We may never be able to get to a point to dig deep into any trauma issues or behavioral health issues. But one thing that we can do is start to address them. We can ask the questions during initial assessment or during a brief intervention about the background of how we actually got here, about the pain. And that should be incorporated in any assessment, not just the assessment of how much you drink every day or the assessment of how much cocaine do you smoke. But we need to start talking start talking about a point of recovery earlier in assessments and brief intervention. That's the part that was hindering our process, in my perspective. The second part was allies, what can we do differently moving forward? I think we need to talk to each other more. I think that forums like this need to exist more, not just on a annually or quarterly level. I think that we need to have the approaches of sharing resources and different techniques on a much more broader scale more often, because new professionals are always coming into the field. And also we need to sharpen our tools within our own professionals that have been doing this for a while, because we can look at our approach as the best approach. In actuality, it may not be hitting the mark anymore, because communities do evolve and we need to evolve with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri. I'll pass on to Gary.
Thank you. Those have all been wonderful comments, and they certainly are hindering moving forward. One of the most, for me, important things that I have experienced that hinders our process is not having enough safe spaces to have this conversation, to do this work, and to share with each other. And I know that safety is very, very important for all of us as we grow up. If we don't feel safe in an environment, we're not going to flourish. And an example of that here in Alaska with COVID is I work with 32 villages. And what we have experienced up here when the COVID lockdown happened in the villages, they just completely shut down. You weren't allowed to come in by plane or by water. You weren't able to travel in by snowmobile. There was this complete lockdown. And what happened during that time was the suicides went down. They went down in the Alaska villages during the lockdown phase. Now, after lockdown and things started opening back up again, suicidality and ideations began to increase. But what that told me was during that lockdown phase, when families were forced to be together, forced to share meals together, forced to go camping together or hunting together, they felt safe. And I know traditionally with American Indians that when our ancestors lived in remote villages and shared with each other, and grandmother was at the table every day, she would observe the behaviors of the families, and she would make comments, or uncle would make comments, or auntie about, well, Gary, the behavior you're doing, that's not like you. Why are you lying? Why is this going on? And get to the root of the issue right away, rather than not talk about it. So I think that that really shows that safety is such an important thing. The second piece is some of the communities I work with, they have put up signs in their office that say LGBTQIA2S spoken here. And what that does is it opens the door for someone coming down the hall or someone coming into the building going, wow, there's someone I can talk to. There's someone I can have a conversation with. And they might not do it when grandma brings them in or mother brings them in, who might have some biases, but at least they see a sign of some place that they can go. And I think that's very important. I think we're also getting in our own way. You know, no grant program or nothing is going to save your community until what's already been spoken, until the community comes together and looks at the issue and comes up with their solution and tries something and moves forward. I think belonging is another thing that is hindering in our communities. We don't teach our youth how they belong, where they belong, what culture they belong in. We don't have those kind of things happening in our education system. They aren't even happening in families for a variety of reasons. And for me, had I known that my Salish and Pondere ancestors accepted Two-Spirit as a sacred place in our community, had I known that when I was growing up, my life would have been different. But instead, I lived in the dominant culture where it wasn't acceptable, where I was hiding and where a variety of things happened. And I began medicating that pain with alcohol and drugs. It wasn't until I was 35, until a cultural leader, I was afraid to tell him I was gay when I went to work for the tribe. And when I finally said something, he goes, so? Don't you know that in our culture, that was a respected position? And oftentimes our Two-Spirit ancestors were given sacred places because they could see things in a different way. No one had ever told me that. No one. But what I realized was my Native American relatives, aunties and uncles and grandmothers, never condemned me, never put me down. It was the German side and the dominant side that I got a lot of that hostility from as I was growing up. So safety, and that we're getting in our own way. And I also think when treatment happens, that families must be given the opportunity to learn what their loved one is going through while they're in treatment, so that they can perhaps make some different choices about their behavior and how they can support that loved one when they come home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary. I'll pass on to Anna to share her thoughts.
Thank you, Gary and Dimitri and Leo. Just some great information. For me, that question, what is currently hindering progress? And I'll speak as an African-American woman and an African body, is that I would say stigma, is still a lot of stigma out there that we aren't bringing to the table or putting an eye on, so that people, know what's really expected, or who we are, or how we're different. Again, not putting us into that box, stigma about addiction, a person of color who uses compared to a LGBTQ person who uses. I mean, it's just so much stigma still out there, and how do we, and that's very hindering, when a person doesn't know. And then, to come in and feel like, there's a stigma on you because of your color, or because, and Gary talked about it, can you talk about it? Can I say it? Can I talk about who I am or what I'm feeling? Will someone think differently of me? So I think, that's very hindering, and it's still of the world and in the world. So it's hard for a person. I loved, Gary just put hurt people. Yes, that is so true. And it's still there, right? So big hindering piece on that. I feel like there needs to be campaigns all about that, organizing about it, because it's just so real. And it's still real, I can say, even within my family, as a woman who's in recovery now, Gary talked about that, bringing the family in so that they understand. Because what I needed to know, and I've learned this now, I got better, but my family didn't get better because they were still suffering. Like, is she going to be okay? Is she going to go back and do that again? So they weren't able to get the help, but I was fine. I'm going back to school. I'm a practitioner now, teaching somatic body work, but they still didn't get the help when I was out there using and doing all kind of things, because they never knew if they were going to have their family back. My mother didn't know if she was going to have her daughter back. Right. So I love we don't think about that, how important it is to bring in other people that are connected to us so that they can heal too. Right. Because it is about connection. And when we heal and bring them in, they heal. I hear people say, when I heal, you heal. No, everybody has to have their own healing process. Right. I mean, you really do. Because it touches everybody in a different way. So I say stigma, and then also we have to have, preventionists need to have a non-judgmental demeanor, right? Sometimes you can meet some people who are in the field and they're very judgmental. And I'm one of those people now that I can feel. I look to know if you're seeing me, if you're hearing me. I confront that. I'm like, and if I don't feel that, I don't want to, I don't even want to be obtaining any service that you're offering, right? And most people who are coming in, they notice things like that when we're approaching them or how we're treating them. Are we treating them with empathy and respect? Again, I keep saying this, are we treating them as a resource so that they have a say so too? It's not like, oh, just because you're here, this is what you're going to need. No, everybody should be treated with dignity and respect and be treated differently. Dimitri talked about it. He talked about, asking those tough questions, not being afraid to answer those questions. I mean, ask those questions. And if you're afraid to ask them, you have a team of people that are around you. So I think it, what is currently hindering us, I don't know if it's fear, or what we may call it, but it's definitely a lot of stigmatization still around our community. And we need to work through that, and stop that so that more people can get the help that they need when it comes to this. And when we do that, we bring everybody in, not just our family, but we bring the seniors in, we bring the youth in, we bring the reentry in, we bring the treatment in, prevention. All of us should be connected and at the table together. We really, because it affects everybody, and I don't think we'll, get better, we'll keep hindering unless we are, open to change and honest about what's happening in the world. Not acting like we're not seeing things when it's right in our face. A lot of that happens. Not being afraid to ask the tough questions that we need to do, because we're in a field where we're trying to save lives, and we are, I say we're change makers, right? We're not just organizers, advocates, but we're change makers. And when we're in that kind of field to help people who have been looked down upon, looked at differently, treated not with dignity and respect, right? And now we're coming into some of that. But we haven't for years. Now, it's out in the front. Now we can talk about it more. So we can't lose this momentum that's happening now I can say for BIPOC, right? Because now we're speaking up, a lot of things are happening in our community, and when we're trying to connect in that way. So, we just have to keep moving forward with it, but moving forward with it in truth is how I feel. And I'm just passionate about that. I'm passionate about being honest. I'm passionate about stopping stigma. And I'm passionate in that way because I've been there. I've felt that, I felt that where I'm always thinking in my head. And now I think from my heart, I think from the energy that's inside of me, because that lets me and leads me to know the truth, right? So it's all about helping somebody. And I used to say this to my youth, and don't let me die. Tell me the truth. I want to live. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. And this, like you said, it's a very passionate conversation, very educative conversation, and we really appreciate all of you sharing. I also want to encourage our audience and participants to use the Q&A button to also share their questions or comments, or if you can find the Q&A session button, just use the chat box. We'll find the question and we'll respond to you. So thank you. Before I go on to our next question, while Gary was talking about, he mentioned he identifies as two-spirit, and he had talked about the important role they played in his tribe. I personally am interested in learning more about, what two-spirit are and that important role they played in the tribe. I think there are a lot of people in our audience who also love to learn from you. So if it's okay, Gary, I'm putting you on the spot.
Let me get myself off mute. There's a two-spirit word that came about in the early 90s related to American Indians and even more Alaska Natives around an individual who can look at things and walk in perhaps two worlds. Some of my two-spirit ancestors, for example, because they could identify with the male and the female, if you will, they could also identify with some of the roles that those individuals played in their community. And for example, if a hunting party went out and a father was killed and he came back home and there was no father in the family to teach the young ones about fathering and about the father's role, they were often paired up with a two-spirit individual. Sometimes they called them shamans. They had different names for them, but they didn't even back then have a two-spirit name. There was just someone in the community that had that ability to educate the youth when they'd lost a father or lost a mother about some of those life lessons and life skills that are so important for young boys and girls to learn. So these were individuals in the communities that were sometimes looked at as medicine men, but more, it was just a role in the community that was able to look at things in a different way, and they were accepted and in some senses revered, and it has taken a different meaning throughout the years, because some tribes got very indoctrinated when the government sent religion to save the heathens, if you will. And so the certain religious affiliations came into communities and said, your cultural practices are wrong, your ceremonies are wrong, your language is wrong, all of this stuff is wrong. So when you hear that enough, you tend to go, well, what can I do? And so they would grasp on to religion and grasp on to the old ways that were natural to them, now were wrong. So they weren't identifying individuals in the communities that could take on those roles because the church, for example, didn't respect that role and said it was Satan or it was the devil. And I'm not putting down religion, not at all. I'm just saying that the individuals that went to different communities to save the savage beasts, if you will, I think we were okay before. So did that help?
Thank you, Gary. Yes, that helped.
I developed our program developed 6 Two-Spirit newsletters this year for 6 months called Spirit, Honor, and Inclusion. And if anyone wants a copy of those 6 newsletters, I'd be happy to share.
Thank you, Gary. We will share Gary's contact information at the end of this session. So you can reach out to him or reach out to Priscilla, or anyone else, and we'll get those newsletters across to you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Gary. So we'll go on to our next question. I hope we're doing well with time, Priscilla. Great. So our next question, this is for all the panelists. What are your wishes for the future? So in 5 years from now, what do you want this work to look like? How would you want to see what do you want to see people doing to bring community together, to create safe spaces to discuss, like you mentioned, and what do you want us to be doing around addressing the issues that we've seen in behavioral health around our work with LGBTQ2S relatives or community members? Oh, yes. So I'll ask Gary first to respond to that question. Thank you.
Okay. Well, gosh, in 5 years, it makes me think of what I just talked about, that in my my culture and with my ancestors, there wasn't a need for a label. There wasn't a need to have the conversation and identify, because everybody just knew. And I'd like to see a world where everyone belongs, where everyone knows that everyone is of value, and that we all check our biases on a regular basis and act accordingly. That's what I'd like to see, is that we don't have to have this conversation, because it's been ingrained in who we are and how we live and how we present ourselves and how we walk in this world. Was that enough?
Yes, Gary, that was enough. And thank you so much for sharing that. When I say relatives, it doesn't necessarily mean people are related by blood. This is how in the Native American community, we see everyone who is a member of the community, whether related by blood. So I'll pass on to Dimitri to respond to that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would hope my own wishes going forward that realistically, the prevention is never developed through the lenses of dare or just say no. Sometimes we're doomed to repeat ourselves. We can't find a solution that works. So we'll go back and pick up models and try to revamp them and think that they'll just be the magic cure for such ills, our society ills. And that's not the case. I think the best approach going forward is in family dynamics. I think the education and family dynamics need to be taught earlier in childhood development education. The roles of the mother, the father. I'm not talking about our stereotypical roles. I'm talking about the roles of caregiving, how our interactions between our families and how we're free to express our feelings and emotional changes during developing at an early age and prepubescent years need to be talked about at an earlier stage than we start to engage in our minds developments when we get to become a teenager. I think that we have those communications in schools that family, no matter what your family looks like, can help engage with time you get to become a teenager and you start to have these feelings and you start to be influenced by different people, that we can go ahead and use our family, the ones that are closest to us, to be the prevention that we need so we can steer away for those things that could destroy us later on in life. If I had that family dynamics to start to understand that the importance of my mother, the importance of my father, not just their stereotypical roles, but the openness that I can engage by opening my mouth, maybe I wouldn't smoke that first joint. Maybe I would have been more engaged with my family to say, hey, okay, I can talk to them about being peer pressured, or maybe I can talk to them about sexuality issues at a young age, you know, why things are happening, why my body is changing, why I can't understand these things. But when we start to close ourselves in, especially when we get to those prepubescent years, and we stop sharing with our family, and the family dynamics start to tear down, we start looking for those family dynamics in other people. And when we look for it in other people, things happen that are not so productive anymore. We get influenced in gangs, we get influenced in situations that could be preventive. So I think the education role of family dynamics need to be taught earlier in school, and not just a theory that is taught in college or in high school. We need to have these models introduced at an earlier age, and for the engagement of family to come first. Whatever family looks like is whatever support. And I want to be very, very mindful of what I'm saying here, because I don't want backlash about what a family should look like, or if I'm being one-sided of what a family should look like. I am not. Family looks like any support that that child needs. It can come from whatever gender that person is. Just like Gary mentioned about the two spirits, it does not matter as long as that child gets what that child needs. And that is an environment that is safe. And Gary mentioned that safe space. Anna mentioned that. And it's very critical. And it can only come through the understanding that our support comes for the ones that are closest to us. And our support comes from the ones closest to us when we understand that they are important to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri. I'll pass on to Anna to respond to the question.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, Dimitri, that was so powerful. I loved the part you said about, family can be anybody, right? That's true. Oh my goodness, it just touched my heart hearing you say that, because that's so real. And what are the wishes for the future? And 5 years from now, what does the work look like, right? For one thing, I hope it looks better than it does now. Way, way better than it does now. Because there is so much more we can do to touch the community. And it's like we talked about, but really using the resources that we have, right? And I was just thinking, I'm like, wow, I'm here. I'm like, for me, if I would have had that thing, like I didn't have to carry everything. I didn't have to be strong all the time. If I said something, people were going to look at me differently, and I knew that at a young age, right? So I could really show up in the true me and not feel like I had to put on this mask, right? Because I feel like I always had to wear a mask, right? And not really show my true self, right? Or get to my core self. It took me years to start even working on my core self. So how do you do that earlier, right? And that's prevention, because prevention is supposed to catch us when we're young. You know what? It missed me. Prevention didn't help Anna. Anna went through a lot of stuff that she should not have had to go through, right? But it just made me the woman I am today. Right. But I think about like how it's going to be in 5 years. I don't want anyone to have to experience what I experienced, right? Or go through addiction like I went through it to get to where I am today. So it's connectedness. It's really making sure that everybody, again, is at the table. And now is the time where it's happening, and a lot of people are trying to make it happen, but it needs to start early. It really does need to start early. And I agree. It doesn't just start with that person, but knowing that person can't do it alone. So who's there for them? Who's in their corner to truly help them? Which agencies are there? You know, it's a new field now that Dimitri and I get to get in, you know, so it's like lived experience, right? So we're in our field, it's about lived experience. We really went through it. So it's okay to call on us so that we can talk to that person so that they don't have to go through what we went through, right? It's okay to call on Gary and call on Leo, right? So that they can explain because they're heart-centered and let people know what they're going through. So it's a major thing in telling your story. I think that's what helped me, you know, getting into that Oxford house, right? And being around women who were like, hey, and they were so honest about what was really going on with them. And I was like, wow, this is new. I've never done that. You're really saying that? That happened? And that was amazing to me, right? And I wanted that. And I noticed when I did that, it was so freeing when I was truly showing up as myself and being honest about what was happening with me in my life. So how do we connect with people in that way where they feel comfortable enough with us, right? To truly be open and say what's really going on with them so that we can know how to get them the help they need. So, and what is it? What would you look like to see doing? So it's a bunch of community and it's a bunch of creating, meeting the person exactly where they are, you know, and I think if we keep doing that, it's going to work because you'll see the change in that person, right? And we're talking culture, right? So it's a different culture and we have to not be afraid of that. Walk into that, want to learn more about that, want to embrace that, want that to be a part of our lives too, right? So, I mean, all of that needs to play a part for us to grow because we can't live in no little shell by ourselves. So we have to want to do that. And hopefully us, since we're speaking out about it now, we'll speak out about it more. Dimitri talked about it. Let's not just let this happen. It may have been Leo. Don't let this talk about like every year it just happens. It needs to be constantly happening. So billboards, marketing, that's what I want to see in 5 years. The real truth about it. Billboards, marketing, not it hidden on a shelf over here, you know, and that's totally for everybody and bringing everybody to the table when it comes to prevention in this, because it's not just us, not just me as BIPOC or, you know, LGBTQ, you know, we have the youth, we have reentry, you know, all of those people who play a part of our culture who are going through something that need to know about this and are of this culture. They need to be at the table too. So all of us need to be at the table. I feel like it's separate on some things. You know, prevention is over here, treatment is over here, reentry is over here. That's not good. Come together. You know, when we need to connect the dots and we try to connect it. We'll do a meeting and then it'll be like, oh, that's good. They got their plan. We got our plan. Connect the dots. It needs to constantly be happening. And hopefully that is something that I'd love to see for the next 5 years. Because I think if that happened for the next 5 years, that we are connecting on every level, the peers with prevention, I mean, everything, then we're going to grow because we'll hear all the different voices and we'll know exactly what to do and what's needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. So I'll pass on to Leo to respond to the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you everyone who's answered these questions as such a wealth of wisdom that has been shared and that I like to build on some of that. I just recently got an interaction with one of my cousins in Argentina. They're currently putting together a project, I think a bill over there that they want to institutionalize more education for younger children that includes elements of you know, showing, normalizing LGBTQ folks. So there's like a lot of people up in arms saying, oh, that's just indoctrinating our children and stuff like that. So he shared some ugly meme, you know, that it was along those lines, showing that point that, you know, that they don't want to indoctrinate children. And I got into an argument, of course, with him over, you know, I'm like, you know me, I said, you don't think that I am a role model for your children? Oh, yes, you are. Well, do you take out the fact that I'm gay out of that? Well, no. And well, you know, that's what we need to do. We need to normalize things because that's what has been wrong all along. We have had, what Anna was mentioning earlier, that those judgmental demeanors, and not using the proper words, because words matter. We have to normalize LGBTQ folks in our families. I used to do with a Latino Link, we used to do a workshop for moms. It was for parents, but moms were the ones showing up, of course. Where we would have some videos about, so then we would have conversations and have these conversations about values, about what is it that you want your children, values that you want your children to have. Well, this, honesty and, and they would mention a bunch of different things. And I said, well, but, doesn't matter if they're gay or lesbians or transgender or whatever. And they were like, well, as long as, they share my values, that's the most important. So we were trying to steer the conversation into what's important in life and normalizing, that accepting families create healthier individuals. We wouldn't have a lot of the social ills that we currently have, like homelessness. I volunteered years ago with an organization in Atlanta, and at the time it was like out of the youth that was out on the street, 40% was LGBTQ. They identified, and most of them were people of color, were LGBTQ kids of color. And within 48 hours, they were approached by somebody to do drugs, to sell drugs, or to prostitute themselves. And what is so that's, what we're talking about. We talk about social determinants of health all the time, and all these trendy words, but what are we doing about them? When people come to us and they say, well, I'm having issues with housing. Well, but we need to do this because our program tells us that we have to do A before B before C. No. We have heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have to start, what is it that people need first? Let's meet their needs first. Let's do what they need, because if we don't, they're gonna go somewhere else. And then we lose the chance of actually working on whatever our field is, because prevention has to be more holistic. We cannot compartmentalize all of these social ills. They all come together. For the most part, they all come together. So I'm sorry, I get very passionate about this stuff. So so that's what I want to see. I want to see academia marrying practice and not being two separate things. Whereas we have to get off the pedestal to tell people how to live their lives. Let's just get off the pedestal and connect with people. Because if we don't connect, nothing will happen. Now, the only times that I have ever done any kind of social work and that it was lasting was when I had a connection with that person that was in front of me. And they were able to see that I had their various interests there at heart. And that's the only way that it happens. So I just want to see that, that community engagement happens in a more meaningful way, that we have the tools to do the work that we need to do. Funding is an issue, for the most part, so in all our fields. So I hope that we do get the whole of the bigger picture of treating all of this holistically. So thank you.
Thank you, Leo, and do not apologize for that passion. That is what fuels us and keeps us going, even with all the challenges we face in our work. So thank you for all that passion. Before I round up this question, I'd like to pass on to Gary again to add some more points to this question. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. I just had 3 points that I wanted to add to the future and looking at this is I really hope we continue taking the trauma-informed approach to the work that we do. I know for me, the first time someone said, "What happened to you?" instead of pointing out what's wrong with you, things started to change. The conversation changed, the safety changed. So I think in 5 years, I hope that's embedded in what we do. The other piece is continuing to take a look at intergenerational and historical trauma and what role that has played in hindering our moving forward. And sometimes it's just education. I didn't know my grandmother and her brother went to boarding school and only spoke their native language, and it was beaten out of them. I didn't know that. Grandma didn't talk about that. I didn't know my mother went to boarding school, that she was molested. Maybe had those conversations or those kind of things not been bottled up or stuffed down inside and they just went on with life, I didn't know that my grandmother didn't learn from her mother and grandmother about how to be a mother, because she was at boarding school and she was learning about how to be a seamstress. And she was learning about how to clean a house. She wasn't learning about nurturing. She wasn't learning about caring. We didn't talk about any of these things. We're the first generation speaking this language about intergenerational and historical trauma in all of our communities. And when we know where our ancestors came from and some of the pain that they weren't able to share, we've learned that that's passed on in the DNA, that the children or grandchildren are having these feelings of anger and behavior and different things, and they don't know where they're coming from. But when we explore the intergenerational trauma that happened and we put words to it and we speak to it, then we can begin the healing and let it go and not repeat it again. The third thing was that we should always continue to keep the word sustainability in our minds, that whatever we're doing, we don't just look at sustainability at the end of a 5-year grant, that you do it all the time, and that you include cultural acceptance, cultural competence, and cultural effectiveness in that center as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary. Yes, like Anna, clapping right here. This has been very interesting, and I do see we have a couple of questions or comments in the chat box. So I'll read Ibrahim Mansare's question. I hope I pronounced your name right. My apologies. So Ibrahim is asking, in spaces that discuss, for instance, Black male mental health or Black female mental health, do you think these discussions can be more inclusive to include Black males and Black females who are gay, bisexual, lesbian, or trans men or women? Do you feel these discussions tend to be more heteronormative in language, for instance, or that discussions are changing, as opposed to having separate discussions on BIPOC, LGBTQ2S people and mental health concerns? Is the separation more helpful, or should there be more togetherness? That's my understanding. Thank you. And any of our panelists can take this discussion. I see Dimitri, mic is on.
Yeah, I think it's important on the audience. If there's stigma within the community itself, then maybe the separation is needed. But to have more education in the broader perspective of more inclusion is needed. Here's the thing with that part. Understanding your audience may not be effective by separation at the same time. I don't want to be double-minded on this, but sometimes you just have to put it out there in the space. If you want understanding of a community, sometimes the inclusion method doesn't work because we have our own barriers within our own community. I give you an instance. So I'm a Black heterosexual male, okay? When I talk to other Black heterosexual males about childhood, other white males may not understand that, okay? But the education of how to be a better or be a more productive father may be in the spaces of just Black males, so we can each bounce off how we parent to one another. That being said, we wouldn't invite other white males into conversation if our main goal is to help each other become better fathers. So in the LGBTQIA2S community, inclusion may not work. But at the same time, we have to, at the same time, we also have to be mindful that if we want to move the needle at all, we have to bring other people's perspective into the conversation. But just like other panelists have talked about, we have to be at the table at first. So it's an ongoing perspective. It's an ongoing measurement of what is the most effective approach to our conversations of understanding. But for me personally, a Black heterosexual male talking to another Black heterosexual male about fatherhood, I need to have that in a certain space with other Black heterosexual males. Not being biased, but if I want that understanding to grow, it has to start there. And then maybe the help that we may need may come from other populations or certain communities. But for right now, for that instance, in my own point of view, that's where I stand.
I'm going to say something on that too. Thank you, Demetrius. I want to thank, and I'm not sure who the question came from, for bringing in mental health, right? Because we haven't brought that in, and that's just so major, especially in the BIPOC community, LGBTQ community, because sometimes it goes hand in hand. And I feel like we all can be in the same space. And I do feel that it needs to be brought where everybody's at the table, from all, cultures that you just talked about. And yeah, it can be inclusive, but we still have to come out and express what's happening so that people know, and who better to talk about it than us. Because people can't talk for us, we have to talk for ourselves. I have a brother personally who is mentally ill, and I have to speak for him. I also have a sister who is, LGBTQ. She's living her life. She has a mental issue too. So I communicate with her, I connect in that way, so she doesn't feel shamed, like she can't talk about it. So I love the way Gary talked about it, how we're breaking the things in our family now. We're the ones who are like, hey, this is okay. You're here. It's okay to be here, right? We're doing that now. When you talked about the family and how you found, I felt the passion in what you were saying, because that's what's happening in my family right now. It is, the mental illness. We didn't want to talk about it. We didn't want to talk that we had members who are transgender or gay. It was like, we can't talk about it in our own family. How sick is that? And now, we're bringing it to light, and it's connecting us more, and it's helping us help each other. And it's freeing our ancestors, now they're free, because we're opening up, and we're not keeping those 6 secrets anymore, because they really weren't. Everyone has a right to live and be happy. So I say, bring it out. We need to be connected. We need to all be at the table. I think it's important. I think more conversations need to happen with each one of these on here that you just talked about. It's important. That's how people learn. That's how we understand. That's how we get connected, and that's how we grow.
Thank you so much, Anna. I see that we are getting to about 10 minutes left. So I would like to ask one final question. If there are no other questions from the audience, is there anything you'd like to add from our panelists? How would you like to round up this discussion? Thank you. And I will pass on to Leo to respond.
And this is a related maybe to what Ibrahim was mentioning there, and probably is more like background information about assumptions and communities of color, and sometimes we hear these things about, oh well, that Latino communities are much more homophobic, or all Black communities are more There are no communities that are more homophobic than any other one. We all live in a wide society which is homophobic. It just the dynamics are different. It shows up in a totally different way. Because I've seen I work with youth, I work with the adults. and the consequences of being what is rejected by their own families. Doesn't matter the color; it just comes in all ways, and for all races. Now, the way that we respond to those needs, yes, there is no one size fits all. We have to create solutions for specific individuals. If I'm working with someone who is African American, then that's what I need to cater to those needs. If I'm working with someone who is Latino, then I have to cater to whatever needs that I think that belong to that. And I ask, is there any specific needs? What is not make assumptions, because that's when we make mistakes. Just ask. It says, how can I support you? How can I provide you support today? That's the only question you need to ask, because people will tell you what is that they need. And just give them space, just listen. Something that I hear all the time is just, it is one way of being, trauma informed is get away from those intake forms. Then nobody cares about those intake forms other than you. So let people talk and you fill in the blanks while they're talking. So that's what we need to do. What is and then at the end, if there's something in that form that you still don't have, then ask questions so you can get all those blanks, fill in for yourself. Because I understand that you need to have it, but that's the way to do it. Let's just work around. So that's my takeaway for today. So thank you.
Thank you, Leo. So I'll pass on to Gary to respond. Thank you.
While we're wrapping up here, I just wanted to ask participants to type in the chat box if they feel comfortable. If you could pass on one thing to your unborn grandchildren or nieces or nephews, what would that one thing be? And put that in the chat box. And what I've discovered in doing this exercise with communities is they go around the room and they share what values to them that they want to pass on. And all of those things put together can be a guide for the future. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. I'll pass on to Dimitri to respond.
So Gary, thank you. I typed in humility. So I'm going to actually sum this whole experience up to that. Having humility to understand that I don't know everything, that what I've been taught or the way that I lead interventions or the way that I lead my referrals may not be the only way, that I can still be open. And humility comes of knowing that I can still learn today. When I stop learning from others, I stop being of service. And when I stop being of service, what is my role anymore? Because if we're all of service, we're all here to help each other. We're all here to help each other. We all can move the needle forward. One part of our series was moving the needle. How do we move the needle? Together, not individually. And it comes through humility. So thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri. And last but not the least, Anna.
Oh, wow. This has just been so awesome. I'm truly honored to be, have the blessing to be with just all four of the panels and each of the panelists, and just working with everyone from PCCT to Dana Institute. It's been a true blessing. Just honored. And in fact, can say anything, it's just speak your truth. Don't sit in the dark anymore. Don't be afraid to have a voice. And having a voice and being heard can be one of the most important things that you offer and you give to the world. So yeah, that's what I would say, because it took me a long time to really have my voice and feel comfortable in speaking my truth. And today in doing that, I feel I give to the world, but more better, I give to myself so that I can show up for the world. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to our wonderful panelists. Thank you for sharing your time and your knowledge with us. I learned so much, and I'm sure entire group also learned so much. I'll pass on to Priscilla to round up the session. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Thank you for all the panelists. Thank you for the TTCs that are collaborating with us. Thank you for the participants for all your engagement, especially on this last exercise proposed by Gary. Gary was incredible. I even took some notes to share with you because I think that was such a powerful way to wrap up this 4-part series. Be proud of who you are, be kind, you are loved just the way that you are. Have faith, humility, you are worthy, you are destined to be who you are. So these are beautiful affirmations. I wanna remind myself about those affirmations, and I wanna be kind to others from my community, from my family, from my relatives. Thank you so much for your availability. Here is the contact information from our panelists. They were kind enough to share the email addresses. So please, if you have any questions, reach out to them directly. We do appreciate you sharing your knowledge, your own experiences with us. I learned a lot from you and with you. It was my pleasure. And here, for those who missed the first 3 sessions, or for those who want to watch it again, we have the recordings available. Please access our website and you will be able to watch the recording and download the slides that we provided earlier. Here you can contact our TTCs directly. Here's the Central East ATTC contact information and then Central East PTTC contact information. You can reach out to them to request TA, resources, assistance. They are there for you. The same for Cindy's PTTC and for our own center, the National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center. You will now be directly to a website with this link with the satisfaction evaluation. This is so important for the work that we do, so we appreciate you taking a minute of your day to answer these questions and to help us to tailor our upcoming events. Let us know, what do you want to hear from us, how we can serve you better. And thank you again for the panelists, for the TTCs, for the participants. It was a pleasure to work with you on this series. I learned a lot. I appreciate you all. Thank you. Have a lovely day, a blessed day. Bye.